Shabbat Shalom, everyone. We are continuing our study of Second Baruk, and this is the 30th day of the 8th month, or you actually, Pearl, you have it as the first, or is it the 29th?
29th.
Okay, so we have it the 30th of the 8th month, or the 29th of the 8th month, depending on your reckoning, and it is chapter 75 of Second Baruk. And I answered and said, who can equal your Tob, which we translate in the English usually as good or pleasantness? Who can equal your Tob, Yahuwah? For it is incomprehensible. Or who can fathom your free unmerited favor and pardon, which is without end? Or who can comprehend your intelligence? Or who can narrate the thoughts of your Ruach? Or who of those born can expect to arrive at these things, apart from those to whom you are lovingly kind and compassionate? For if you were not lovingly kind to men, those who are under your right hand, they were not able to come to them apart from those who were named among the famous number. But we who exist, when we know why we have come, and then subject ourselves to you who brought us out of Mitzrayim, we shall come again and remember those things which have passed away, and rejoice with regard to the things which have been. But if we do not know now why we have come, and do not recognize the sovereignty of you who brought us up from Mitzrayim, we will come again and ask for that which has now occurred, and shall be severely grieved because of that which has happened. And he answered and said to me, since the revelation of this vision has been explained to you as you prayed for, hear the word of Yahuwah the Most High, that you know that which will happen to you after these things. For you will truly depart from this world, nevertheless not to death, but to be kept unto the end of times. I want to point out something I've recently come to knowledge of, and I don't know how accurate it is, just so you're aware. In Second Baruk here, we find a record of Baruk being told over and over again he's going to be kept in paradise until the consummation of the times because of his disposition. And specifically, what's highlighted of him is his mourning for Zion, his lamentations for his mother, as he calls it. In Ezra, his disposition is exemplified for why he is taken to paradise. And likewise, we have Hanok is explained that he was translated because he was walking with Elohim. Eliyahu was also taken, but it's not exactly explained in there why. It mentions why in the animal apocalypse in the book of Hanok, however. But to get back to the point, Ezra is mentioned to have died by Josephus and to be buried, but they don't know where he's buried. In the same way, Moshe was buried, but they don't know where he's buried anymore. And when he appeared with Eliyahu to our Mashiach in front of his taught ones. So it's quite possible that he did die, but was resurrected, and his body is no longer where it was, so it couldn't be used for idolatry. That's not entirely certain. That's not a point of contention. But my point here is that there's differences between what they say happened and what it might actually be. Another example is some people misconstrue what it says in the book of Hebrews to say that Hanok died, even though we have a record that he's translated. In the same way, Baruk here is told that he would be translated or taken to paradise, kept until the consummations of the times. And we have in the book of Tephi, in the stories and records there, that he was going with Yirmiyahu and Tephi to take her, the daughter of Zedekiah, from Mitzrayim to Ireland. and that he died while in Spain. What I don't take that as accurate when in light of this and other writings as well, but it's there. Just like the mention of Ezra dying is there. And it's just like the mention of Yahukanan, the one that wrote the Besora and the epistles. It mentions in the end of that one that they had asked, Kepha had asked our Mashiach, well, what about this one? Talking about the one who had leaned his head on his bosom, the one who was writing those things and witnessing it. And quite possibly, I think that that's Lazarus, because he's the one
Mhm.
that's called the one whom Yahushua loves, and he's the one that was the beloved of him that was raised from the dead. So the context there was, he said, what is it to you if he remains until I come? And then the story was that he wasn't going to die. But it's quite possible he didn't. They have an idea that he was dead and buried somewhere, but they can't find the place where he was. So there's that same theme there. But I did want to point out some place I'd read where he's taken to paradise and some place that he died. And I've seen that for Ezra as well. And it's also mentioned, like we just said, for the book in Hanok. Some people misconstrue what it says in the book of Hebrews or the epistle of the Hebrews to say that he also died. Um, I'm not saying that is true. I'm just pointing those things out so that we can see a pattern. It's quite possible that these men are actually, and I do believe they're in paradise today, and everyone that's like them, that has that same disposition, will also not taste death, because our Creator doesn't play favorites. He's consistent. But let's continue. We're on verse 3. It says, therefore, go up to the top of this mountain, and all countries of this Eretz will pass before you, as well as the likeness of the inhabited world, and the tops of the mountains, and the depths of the valleys, and the depths of the seas, and the number of rivers, so that you may see that which you leave and where you go. This will happen after 40 Yamim. Go therefore now during these Yamim and instruct the people as much as you can, so that they may learn lest they die in the last times, but may learn so that they may exist in the last times. So he's basically telling them, I'm going to take you, but I want you to go exhort the people and speak to them while you can, how you're able. And so this is what he goes and does.
So when you're talking about those men, do you think there are women too?
In paradise, everyone who's of the same disposition. If you remember, our Mashiach said there's neither male nor female. There's not a Greek nor Yahudi, not a slave nor not a barbarian or a Scythian, but all are one in Mashiach Yahushua. So it's never just the blood descendants, it's always the obedient, whether they're the literal seed and those sojourning with them.
Hmm.
And that's consistent throughout all of Scripture. Remember, it was Abraham and all those that were circumcised in his house. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But right here, we're on chapter 77. It says, Baruk speaks to the people. And I, Baruk, went away from there and came to the people, and assembled them from the greatest to the smallest, and said to them, Shema, that's here, right? I usually like to translate that as hearken, because it's more than just hearing. He wants to hear, believe, and do. It says, hearken, children of Yisrael. Behold, how many are left from the 12 tribes of Yisrael. To you and to your fathers, Yahuwah gave the Torah above all nations. And that is the truth. The Torah of existence was given to the children. But all those who wanted to could forsake all they had and come follow him and join them and be sojourners in the land with them. And then they would be called whatever tribe they dwelt with, which was enjoined in the instructions, if you remember. It says, and because your brothers have transgressed the commandments of Yahuwah the Most High, he brought vengeance upon you and upon them, and did not spare the ancestors. But he also gave the descendants into captivity and did not leave a remnant of them. And behold, you are here with me. If therefore you will make straight your ways, you will not go away as your brothers went away, but they will come to you. For he is lovingly kind whom you honor, and lovingly kind in whom you expect, and true, so that he will do tob to you and not evil. I'd like to point out here 76 said, but if they would turn and make their ways straight, his brothers would come to them. And that's literally what happened in the reign of Yoash-Yahu. If you'd remembered, he turned away, and he alone of all the people that existed then turned to do what was right and pleasing in his eyes. He put away the idolatry in the land, not only in Yahudah, but also in the land, in the remnants of Manasseh and Ephraim that were with them. And it was during his reign that the Scythians overran the Assyrian Empire, overthrew that power, and reigned through the Middle East for 28 years. It mentions in the scripture that the remnant of Yisrael in the land kept the feast with Yoash-Yahu at that time, and there wasn't a feast like it until you go back to the time of Shlomo, because it was such a joyous festival with so many. And that was just of the children that were ruling over all the Middle East that happened to be in the land then at the time. So it's pretty amazing, but also a confirmation of that. Or I'm sorry, this was also a foretelling of that being, or that coming about. So let's continue. Verse 8, it says, have you not seen what has befallen Zion? Or do you think that the place has sinned and that it has been destroyed for this reason? Or that the country has done some crime and that it is delivered up for that reason? Or do you not know that because of you who sinned, the one who did not sin was destroyed, and that because of those who acted unrighteously, the one who has not gone astray has been delivered up to the enemies? So this is very important to keep in mind, because what's true for, they say what's true for the goose is, or what's good for the goose is good for the gander there. But what's true for the lesser light, the moon, the Shamayim Yerushalayim, or the physical representation, the Malkuth on earth, the same is true for the greater one, which represents the bridegroom. And he came as the light of the world, but he died for our benefit. And both of these are represented in creation when you look at the phases of the moon, and then the rise, the coming and the going of the sun every day. It's a representation of the death and the resurrection of the light, which is pointed out very clearly in Clement's first epistle to the Corinthians, when he's going over the different types of resurrections that are in creation to point out the truth of them. But he says, the people invite Baruk to write a letter. And the whole people answered, and they said to me, everything which we can remember of the excellent things which Yahuwah Elohim has done to us, we shall remember. And that which we do not remember, he knows in his free, unmerited favor and pardon. But do this for us, your people. Write also to our brothers in Babylon a letter of doctrine and a roll of expectation, so that you might strengthen them also before you go away from us. For the shepherds of Yisrael have perished, and the lamps which gave light are extinguished, and the fountains from which we used to drink have withheld their streams. Now we have been left in the darkness, and in the thick forest, and in the aridness of the desert. And I answered and said to them, Shepherds and lamps and fountains came from the Torah, and when we go away, the Torah will abide. If you therefore look upon the Torah and are intent upon chokmah, or wisdom, then the lamp will not be wanting, and the shepherd will not give way, and the fountain will not dry up. And if you can recall into your mind all the different things about chokmah is in the word, where it's also where knowledge and insight dwell, and that is the person of our Mashiach speaking through the mouth of Shlomo. But it's the lamp is our Mashiach in Revelation as well, which is also the Torah, and he is our shepherd, who is the fountain of existence. So all of these concepts are in the Torah, are equally applicable to the Torah giver, which is exactly why Kepha in his preaching says he is the Torah and the Torah giver. And this is why Shaul can boldly say that a righteousness outside of the Torah has now been revealed, because he has been made flesh and dwelt among us. And the Torah is Tov and righteous and set apart, if you can recall, just like him. All right, to continue now, verse 17. It says, nevertheless, I shall also write to your brothers in Babylon as you have said to me, and I shall send it by means of men. Also, I shall write to the 9.5 tribes and send it by means of a bird. Now, you might not know why, but he mentions 9.5 tribes, and that's because half of Louis was with them and half of Louis was in the land. It was dispersed among both. Shimon was also dispersed among them all, but he collectively went with the northern kingdom, or the northern reign. It doesn't mention that any of him collectively stayed as a tribe with Benjamin and Yehuda, but Louis did. So you can see that that's why that says that. Verse 18, and it happened on the 21st Yom of the 9th month that I, Baruk, came and sat down under the oak in the shadow of the branches, and nobody was with me. I was alone. And I wrote 2 letters. One I sent by means of an eagle to the 9.5 tribes, and the other I sent by means of 3 men to those who were in Babylon. And I called an eagle and said to him these words. Before we read that real quick, I don't mean to keep breaking into this so much, but things keep coming to mind. Just this week, I had a conversation with my children about men and Adam being given dominion. That's not just to exist and to grow food. He was given dominion over all creation, including, Irenaeus informs us, over Ruachoth, or what men traditionally call spirits. And this is something that was reestablished. It was something our Mashiach showed as fact and reestablished in him with the renewed covenant, so that those that were of it also had this dominion and authority over Ruachoth. But it's not just that, it's command and dominion over all creatures, all flesh, birds, beasts, you name it. And that's why those of his chosen, when they were fed to wild animals, quite often the wild animals would not harm them, or the fire would not touch them. And it was a man walking in wickedness that would have to do so, because creation works toward those that are given dominion over it. That's essentially how that is. But most men don't comprehend the covenant we've been given. However, right here is an example. He's petitioning for this bird to obey him based on what he knows to be in the word. And we'll see that right here. Or what he knows to be true. And this is what he said to the eagle, verse 21. You have been created by Yahuwah the Most High, that you should be higher than any other bird. But now go and do not stay in any place. Do not go into a nest. do not sit on any tree until you have flown over the breadth of many waters of the river Euphrates, and have come to the people that live there, and cast down to them this letter. If you follow the Euphrates up, it, it splits off into many tributaries, and you go over the north of the Black Sea there, you get to what Fourth Ezra calls the land of Araseth. It's still called the river and the valley Sereth today. And the northern kingdom, those, not the whole body of them, but a remnant of them that chose to be obedient to the Torah outside of the land, that they would not be obedient to in the land. Fourth Ezra explains that they went over to this location to dwell where no man had dwelt. This is modern day Ukraine, and it's from the Danube to the Don. Between those rivers, all named from the tribe of Dan, they were different names before the Scythians came there, or the Scythians, and then after they went there, they named them after, Dan named them after themselves in a variety of capacities. But this is the area that he's asking this eagle to go to. And he says, and come to the people that live there and cast down to them this letter. Remember that Noah, at the time of the flood, received the fruit of the olive tree from a dove when he sent it away from the ark. And also the ravens served Eliyahu when they brought food to him as they were commanded. Also Shalomo, in the time of his Malkuth or reign, commanded a bird where he wanted to send a letter, and in whatever he was in need of, it obeyed him as he commanded it. And do not be reluctant, and do not deviate to the right nor to the left, but fly and go straight away, that you may preserve the command of Yahuwah Elohim, as I said to you. Chapter 78. It says the letter to the 9.5 tribes. So this is directly to what in historical context we call the Scythians. This would not be every branch of them, because even now the 10 tribes in dispersion, in reality it was a remnant of all 12 tribes in dispersion, but not all of them were in the same spot. Here, however, 9.5 tribes specifically were part of this remnant that went away to the Scythians. And there's also a separate group in that same area called the Royal Scythians, from which the line of Yahuda, the line of Yahuda and the line of Dawid or David reigned over them. They kept sending people from the Royal Scythians to be the sovereign over the Parthian empires whenever they would wipe themselves out, because it was traditional. The curse from Dawid committing adultery with Bathsheba was that the sword would not leave his house. And that's something that you can see throughout the reign of the Parthian Empire until they got the Besorah and came to the knowledge of the truth in our Mashiach. Whenever, quite often, a new sovereign would come to the throne of the Parthian Empire, he would wipe out his family and those closest to him. So it would require having to come, they'd always have the entirety of the reign for the Parthians. They had one dynasty over them, the Sarksid dynasty, all of them from the same family, but not always directly from parent to child. My point was that same sword carried on through here, and it carried on through the nobility of Europe, even to now, with character assassinations and the abominations that they're doing. I'm not sure if you have ever looked into it, but you can find information online about how all the presidents of the United States, save one possibly, were related to each other. Most all of them, I think at one point it was 33 out of 44 of them were related to Charlemagne, the first emperor of the First Reich, or the what they call the Holy Roman Empire there. But they're all from the line of Yahuda, was my point. it was still his word. Because of Yahuda's disposition, he was given the reign, and then it was given to Dawid. And so literally, you can track through history how his seed has ruled over the, the children. But that wasn't my point. Did you have a comment, Jeanette?
Yes, a friend and I were talking about this, and she said that that scripturally, Trump has to win the thing because even though Biden is in that lineage, Kamala Harris is not.
Mm.
So according to scripture, she could not be president.
Right, she couldn't be. But if you recall, before our Mashiach returned, the sign of his coming would be the lawgiver reigns from Yahuda over the children until Shaola comes. So there is precedence for having someone not of Yahuda reigning over his body collectively right before he returns. Whether that is actually going to happen, I'm not certain, but that will also have to do with the monarchies that still exist, particularly the throne in England. That is the seat of Dawid in the world today. If you look at the coat of arms, they have his harp. They have the 3 lions from the line of Peretz, the red lion from the line of Zerah. It's united quite a few and tracked it down. That's a lot of information that isn't really applicable to us at this point, other than to point out in Yobelim, in the common scriptures, and in the other writings, we have infallible promises given by the creator of everything for certain conditions. The literal seed of Abraham becoming innumerable, filling up the nations, holding the gates of their enemies, being a baraka to all the world, and having, and there's other ones like the literal seed of Yahuda ruling over the literal children of Yaakov, and also the literal seed of Dawid having a perpetual throne over the literal seed of Yaakov. These are promises that are not conditional in the covenant. So these are things that they are fact. If you're really believing that scripture is true, then there's no reason to believe that this is not true because it's scripture. But it's a lot to take in, especially with all the things that we've been lied to about, and sadly with the moral condition of most of us and those in authority. It makes it difficult to try to get that in mind. I would like to point out, though, you just look through the Melachim, look through the Chronicles, you'll have a handful of righteous and the majority are not. That's the pattern we see through history.
Do you know where it says that there will be the ruler will not be from that line right before he comes?
Yes, it's in the foretelling of the Baraka for Yahuda. It's already been fulfilled once. It was actually foretold that a leader would cease from Yahuda when Shaola, or the sent one, comes, and to him is the expectation of the nations. And it was, I don't know if you're familiar, but Aaron married the daughter of Nahash, the captain or the prince of the tribe of Yahuda. So Aaron's line was from Yahuda and Louis. And that's why the Maccabees also married in maybe otherwise from that, but that's why they were able to reign as sovereigns and not be destroyed, because they were from Yahuda and legitimate. Before that, Zedekiah's line was the ruling line from Dawid, but he was cursed and no one was going to be ruling from his seed again. And it was the male descendants from that line that came back as governors, not sovereigns. But they were no longer governing after a while, and then the Maccabees took over, and the Maccabees ended up having people who claimed to be a sovereign. And at one point, there was one who was a sovereign, the high Kohen, and a foreteller. And that was actually alluded to in the Testament of Louis, and it was a foreshadow of the office of our Mashiach as well. But let me find that specifically. It says, until Shiloh comes. To
understand what you said when you said where it was at.
I'm gonna find it right now.
Oh,
It's in the baraka that Yaakov gives to his children in Genesis when he's about to die and he's giving the baraka to all of his children, right?
the baraka.
The
Oh, the
blessing.
blessing?
Yes. This is
The favor.
there we go. Well, this is being honoring. Let me just look at it online. All right, so it says, or lawgiver from between his feet until Sheolah comes, and to him is the expectation of the nations. Genesis or Bereshit, chapter 49, and this is specifically verse 10, but let me go there and I'll read it to you.
Genesis 49:10.
Yes, but I'm going to give you the whole thing in just a moment. All right, so the baraka to Yahuda starts on verse 8. It says, and it goes from verse 8 to verse 12. It says, you, Yahuda, your brothers praise you. Your hand is on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children bow down before you. Yahuda is a lion's cub. From the prey you have gone up, my son. He bowed down, he crouched like a lion, and like a lion, who does rouse him? So right there's a picture of three lions. The lion's cub, the young lion, and the old lion. And that's why on their coats of arms they have the emblem of the three lions. And then also for Zerah's line, they have the red lion because of the crimson thread that was around his hand. They also have an emblem of a red hand for a variety of reasons in some of their coats of arms, specifically for the sons of Zerah. And that's the MacDonald clan and some of the nobility from Ireland and the like. But he says, all right, so that was the three lions. And it says, the scepter shall not turn aside from Yahuda, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Sheolah comes, and to him is the obedience of the peoples. Or it says the expectation of the nations in other versions. But it says, binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. And this is used in the recognitions it's quoted, and also in Irenaeus, either the demonstrations of the apostolic preachings or in his 5 books against heresies. This section is quoted and expounded to explain how it talks about our Mashiach when he returned. It was a
We've
foreshadow.
read part of that, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Because I remember, I think I asked you what was the difference between what does it say, the wine and the blood of the grape?
Mm-hmm. And we went over that.
I remember
yes.
that.
Okay. So then you're familiar with how that explains that was the representation of our Mashiach and pointing to him when he came. That same thing is true. These patterns tend to repeat themselves. So it's quite possible, I'm not saying it has to be, but it is quite possible that we're going to see that same theme, and that there is going to be someone who's not from the line of Yahuda reigning over the children before he returns. We'll see. That does seem to be the pattern that's set, though.
I sure hope that's not going to play out right now.
Right? We have to keep in mind, though, what we see there, and this is everything on the news, everything on the alternative news, what they're putting out there on both sides is propaganda and intentionally meant to socially engineer and steer things the way that the adversary wants it to go, because he's the one that has dominion over these things, the prince of the power of the air, they call it, right?
I cannot believe the lies.
Right. Well, that's the key. It's to discern what is true from the lie, and the only way to know the truth is to be studying the scriptures. His word is true, and a light to our feet and a lamp unto our path.
Hallelujah.
Right. But to continue here, it's 2 Baruk 71 or 78, verse 1. And it says, the letter of Baruk, the son of Nariah, so the lamp of Yah, which he wrote to the 9.5 tribes. These are the words of the letter which Baruk, the son of Nariah, sent to the 9.5 tribes which were across the rivers, in which were written the following things. Thus speaks Baruk, the son of Nariah, to the brothers who were carried away in captivity. Free unmerited favor and pardon and shalom be with you. I remember my brothers, the love of him who created me, who loved us from the beginning, and who never hated us, but on the contrary, chastised us. Just like Shaul mentions, everyone whom he loves, every son whom he loves, he reproves and disciplines. So be ardent and repent. And if we're not chastised, then we're illegitimate and not children. And he says, verse 4, and truly I know, are we not all the 12 tribes bound by one captivity, as we also descend from one father? I got sidetracked earlier. I meant to say the 9.5 here are the ones specifically that were the remnant that went above the Black Sea in what we call Ukraine today, between the Danube and the Don, and eventually they spread out from Europe all the way to China. They got so large and all the way down to India. And this is what they call the Scythian culture, or the Indo-European language groups and peoples that were all over the place and then migrated into Europe. But my point here, there was only 9.5 that went above there at the time. During the captivity, though, you can read about how the northern reign was taken into captivity, and also the Assyrians attacked the southern reign, and all the walled cities except for Jerusalem were taken captive, and they were deported. So you had all 12 tribes in dispersion by the Assyrians at that time, but not all of them were a remnant being written to here. So, Father willing, that makes sense. And that's also something that we'll learn as we go. All right, so it says, therefore, I have been the more diligent to leave to you the words of this letter before I die, so that you may be comforted regarding the evils which have befallen you, and you may also be grieved with regard to the evils which have befallen your brothers, and then further, so that you may consider the arbitration of him who decreed it against you to be righteous, namely, that you should be carried away into captivity. For what you have suffered is smaller than what you have done, in order that you may be found worthy of your fathers in the last times. And this is something that is explained in the recognitions of Clement as well. It's either by Kepha or by those that he had taught when they are also speaking. But it mentions that those that are righteous, they suffer afflictions in this existence to help purify them for the time to come. He goes into more detail, but that's a summary of it. It says, therefore, if you think about these things, you have suffered now for your excellence, so that you may not be condemned at the end and be tormented. You shall receive expectation which lasts forever and ever, particularly if you remove from your hearts the idle error from which you went away from here. For if you do these things in this way, he shall continually remember you. He is the one who always promised on our behalf to those who are more excellent than we, that he would not forget, that he would not forever forget or forsake our offspring. And that's what I was just mentioning. He's made promises. This is something that Shaul also goes into detail with. He mentions the covenant that came 430 years after cannot do away with the promises that he, of his own, when he could swear by no one out greater, swore by himself that he would accomplish, so that by two infallible things, our father Abraham would be assured. And because he believed, it was accounted to him for righteousness. But it's incumbent on us that we believe these things. So it says, he is the one who always promised on our behalf to those who were more excellent than we, that he would not forever forget or forsake our offspring, but with much loving kindness assemble all those again who were dispersed. Therefore, my brothers, learn first what befell Zion, namely, that Nebuchadnezzar, the sovereign of Babylon, came up against us. For we had sinned against Yahuwah who created us, and had not observed the commandments which he ordered us. And yet he has not chastened us as we deserve. For what befell you, we suffered even more, for it befell us also. And now, my brothers, when the enemies had surrounded the city, Melachim, or messengers, were sent from Yahuwah the Most High, and they demolished the fortification of the strong wall, and he destroyed their solid iron corners, which could not be loosened. Nevertheless, they hid the set-apart vessels, lest they should be polluted by the enemies. And right here, if you remember that he speaks in parables, I believe we've mentioned this before, but the vessels in the set-apart place, the Kadosh vessels that were taken and hidden, the most treasured possession, the Kadosh Kodashim, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it very plainly says the Kadosh Kodashim is Aharon and his children. It represented the high kahuna and the Kohanim that served in his most set apart place. The ones that drew near to the truth to serve him are his most precious. It's not meaning that he loves them more than others. It was a picture to teach men righteousness, just like the dietary instructions were to teach us character things in the Ruach. The things that he enjoined with the physical tabernacle is to do the same. And right here, where he's talking about how the enemy surrounded it, but he, the Yahuwah the Most High, he sent messengers. They destroyed the place, the strong wall, and the foundations, and loosened what could not be done otherwise. But he hid the set-apart vessels. This is a foreshadow and a parable of our Creator sending the sword, but protecting his chosen. And again, even before this time, if you ever read the ancient history of Caldonia, it's the remnant being delivered from the sword while the wicked are being given to it. And over, you see this very thing. The precious vessels are kept. The innocent are not punished. But the wicked get what they have coming. So right here in the physical dwelling place and the precious vessel set apart for his service, it's a picture and a shadow of that. Father willing, everyone can see that. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. But we can continue otherwise. Verse 3, it says, "And when they had done these things, they left the demolished wall, the looted house, the burned great tabernacle, and the people who were overcome to the enemies. For they were delivered up, lest the enemy should boast and say, We have overcome to such an extent that we have even destroyed the house of Yahuwah the Most High. They have also bound your brothers and carried them away to Babylon, and have caused them to live there. And we have been left here with very few. That is the affliction about which I write to you. For truly, I know that the inhabitants of Zion were a comfort to you, as long as you knew that they were happy. This was more important than the infliction you endured being separated from them. But also, hear the word of consolation. For I mourned with regard to Zion, and asked free unmerited favor and pardon from Yahuwah the Most High, and said, Will these things exist for us until the end? And will these evils befall us always? And Yahuwah Elohim did according to the multitude of his free, unmerited favor and pardon, and Yahuwah the Most High, according to the magnitude of his loving kindness. And he revealed to me a word that I might be comforted, and showed me visions that I might not be again sorrowful, and made known to me the mysteries of the times, and showed me the coming of the periods. My brothers, therefore, I have written to you that you may find consolation with regard to the multitude of tribulations. But you ought to know that our Creator will surely avenge us on all our brothers, according to everything which they have done against us and among us. In particular, that the end which Yahuwah the Most High prepared is near, and that his free, unmerited favor and pardon is coming, and that the fulfillment of arbitration is not far. And again, if you remember, he was speaking during the time of the captivity of Babylon around the middle of the 6th century BC, the 550s. And this was shortly compared to the thousands of years that have already gone before the beginning of the fourth Yom and the coming of the embodiment of the greater light into a physical form, and it's being given to the world. The making of the sun, which was like the bridegroom, a representation of our Mashiach coming. So that's the picture there. But it was closer for them then, right here, than it was previously, just as it is closer for us now for his second advent as it was for those previously. So we have the same picture. All right, it says, For now we seed the multitude of the happiness of the nations, although they have acted wickedly, but they are like a vapor. That word in the Hebrew is usually, they say Havel or Habel. We call him Abel as his name in Scripture in English. And that same word that means a breath or a vapor is also the word that Shalomo uses throughout Ecclesiastics or Kohelet for the word for vanity. But it says, they are like a vapor, and we behold the multitude of their power, while they act impiously, but they will be made like a drop. And we see the strength of their power while they resist Yahuwah Elohim every hour, but they will be reckoned like spittle. And we will ponder about the splendor of their majesty while they do not keep the statutes of Yahuwah the Most High, but as smoke they will pass away. And we think about the beauty of their splendor, while they go down in impurities. But like grass which is withering, they will fade away. And we ponder about the strength of their cruelty, while they themselves do not think about the end, but they will be broken like a passing wave. And we notice the pride of their power, while they deny the Tob of Yahuwah, by whom it was given to them. But as a passing cloud, they will vanish. And all of these allusions are different things that are mentioned in like the Epistle of Yahuda, talks about the waterless clouds without rain. And the Psalms also mention things that allude to these natures. It's very beneficial that anytime we read something like this, and I actually believe Brother Adam, I can't believe I almost forgot his name, Brother Adam from Parable of the Vineyard, when he does his readings, he likes to really go through and break down and point out different scriptures that point to the same themes. He does a really decent job of doing that. But I encourage everyone, whenever you see these themes and you want to look at it, to study them out, to look at the Strongs, to look up every place it's mentioned. You can find what his word defines these things as. And then it's even beyond that, because that is a baseline. It's amazing. It's very beneficial to do. But it's also beneficial to read the Dead Sea Scrolls for this purpose, because it has in it, they'll have many scrolls that are called commentaries on Nahum, commentaries on selected verses of the Psalms, commentaries on Hosea, or different foretellers. And it's literally, they'll write a verse and then they'll tell you the interpretation of it. They'll tell you a verse and the interpretation, a verse and interpretation. And so you get to see what the Kohanim knew about the parables in Scripture and what they meant. And what you find there, it's congruent with all of Scripture, all the way back to the very letters itself. I believe I mentioned it to you before, and it's something that we're going to go over, Father willing. We can go over it in more detail sometime. But if you line up every letter, which is the language of creation, which is the word from the bosom of the Father through which all things came to be. If you line up the letter with every work of creation from the book of Bereshit, the book of Yobelim or Jubilees, and the different creation accounts throughout the scriptures, but particularly chapter 2 of Yobelim, it lists the 22 works in 6 Yamim. And then you line that up with the 22 letters. It's the literal works, it's in parable form of what our Mashiach is doing in creation until he comes towards the millennial reign. If you look at the breakdown of each letter and what work he makes and the things that the letter means and the things that Scripture says about those particular things and what they mean, all of it ties together, and it's an amazing picture. It's not something that's really for everybody. It's meant for those that are studying to show themselves approved. Because quite honestly, you can start going over the concepts there, and if you're not familiar with what is in Scripture, a lot of that's just going to blow right over your head, because you're not going to have a foundation for which you can say, oh, well, that fits perfectly with what's written, if that makes sense to you. But if you're familiar with Scripture, and then you look into those things, everything fits, and it's amazing. And you truly get to see the immensity of the chokmah, or the prudence in creation. But even right here, you can do this with every verse. Anytime it talks about passing clouds or rain or light or the lamp, any type of thing like that where there's a theme that he's explained, it can be used everywhere where these things are mentioned to give us a comprehension in something in an interesting way. But let's continue. This is chapter 83, verse 1. For Yahuwah the Most High will surely hasten his times, and he will certainly cause his periods to arrive. And he will surely arbitrate or judge those who are in his world, and will truly inquire into everything with regard to all their works, which were sins. He will certainly investigate the secret thoughts and everything which is lying in the inner chambers of all their members, which are in sin, and he will make them manifest in the presence of everyone with blame. Just like our Mashiach said, there is nothing hidden which will not be manifest or revealed. Therefore, nothing of the present things should come into your heart, but they should, on the contrary, be expected, since that which was promised will come. And it's mentioned in the epistles that he is trustworthy, even if we are not. So he'll be true to his word, even when we're breakers of it. And we should not look upon the delights of the present nations, but let us think about that which has been promised to us regarding the end. For the end of the times and the periods will surely pass away, and all which is in them together. The end of the world will then show the great power of Yahuwah, our ruler, since everything will come to arbitration. You should therefore prepare your hearts for that which you have believed before, lest you should be excluded from both worlds, namely, that you were carried away into captivity here and tormented there. And here's one of the few places where it explains the definition of his meaning of worlds in Scripture. It's this world in which we exist now, and we combat to righteousness, running the race set before us, laboring to win. And then it's the world to come, which the foothold, the beginning of that is the millennial reign, and the culmination is the forever after death is put away and destroyed. Verse 9, for that which exists now, or that which has passed away, or that which will come, in all of that, neither the evil in it is fully evil, nor the tob is even fully tob. For all sorts of health which exists now changes into illness or illnesses, and every might which exists now changes into weakness, and every power that exists now changes into miseries, and every youthful energy changes into old age and consummation, and every beauty of elegances which now exists now changes into withering and ugliness, and every infantile pride which exists now changes into lowliness and shame, and every boast of haughtiness which exists now changes into the shame of silence, and every delight and all splendor which exists now changes into ruin of silence. The Proverbs talk about how the end of our happiness today, or in this life now, is heaviness, and our joy is heaviness, and our expectation leads to sorrow after happiness. Those are in the Ecclesiastics, if you remember. So this is the same theme. And this is also mentioned in the Apostolic Constitutions in the section for the prayers and the things that you're supposed to meditate on the Shabbat, actually. The idea that the things now that are changeable. What you are exalted in now will turn, and the things that you don't suffer will come. There are calamities and temporal things in this existence that we have to experience. But the ever after and the eternal joys only come through knowing that we have an expectation forever. And that's where true joy comes from. So the otherwise, the temporary happiness and the joys that you receive in this existence, they're fleeting. And this is the same thing that's being said here. And every joy and every delight which exists now change into rejection and ruin. and every clamor of pride changes into silent dust, and every possession of richness which exists now changes into the realm of death alone, and every seizing desire which exists now changes into involuntary death, and every desire of lust changes into the judgment or arbitration of punishment. And every capability of deceit which exists now changes into refutation by truth, and every sweetness of ointments which exists now changes into arbitration and condemnation, and every friendship changes into silent defamations. Since all these things happened now, do you think that they will not be avenged? But the end of everything will come to light. Baruk 84, verse 1. And this is still Baruk in his letter to the 9.5 tribes. Now I gave you knowledge while I still exist. For I have said that you should particularly learn my mighty commandments which he instructed you. And I shall set before you some of the commandments of his arbitration before I die. Remember that once Moshe called Shamayim and Eretz to witness against you and said, if you trespass the Torah, you shall be dispersed, and if you shall keep it, you shall be planted. And also other things he said to you when you were in the desert as 12 tribes together. And after his death, you cast it away from you, and therefore that which has been said before has come upon you. And now Moshe spoke to you before, it befell you, and behold, it has befallen you, for you have forsaken the Torah. And I, behold, I say to you, after you suffered, that if you obey the things which I have said to you, you shall receive from Yahuwah Elohim everything which has been prepared and has been preserved for you. Therefore, let this letter be a witness between me and you, that you may remember the commandments of Yahuwah Elohim, and that it may also, my apologies, and that it may also, one more time, and that it also may serve as my defense in the presence of him who has sent me. And remember Zion and the Torah and the Kodesh land and your brothers and the covenant and your fathers. And do not forget the festivals and the Sabbaths. Here's a great example of the things that we should do in one verse. It's prosperous to those who mourn because they'll be comforted. And we should mourn for Zion just like Baruk. And we'll have the same condition. He was kept in paradise because of his mourning for his mother and his obedience to the Torah and his recalling to mind the set apart land as opposed to those of the nations, and preferring it and his brothers and the covenant of his fathers and the festivals and the Sabbaths to all the things of this world. It's because of his disposition he was taken. And it's likewise because of the dispositions of all of the remnant seed at the end of the age that will be found spotless, that they will not taste death. There is no other condition that you can meet. You have to be the same because he does not play favorites. But here we go. Verse 9. It says, and give this letter and the doctrine of the Torah to your children after you, as also your fathers handed down to you. And ask always and pray seriously with your whole inner being, that Yahuwah Elohim may accept you in loving kindness, and that he may not reckon the multitude of your sinners, but remember the integrity of your fathers. For if he arbitrates us not according to the multitude of his free, unmerited favor and pardon, woe to all us who are born. Further, know that our fathers in former times and former generations had helpers, righteous foretellers, and Kodesh men. But we were also in our country, and they helped us when we sinned, and they intervened for us with him who has created us, since they trusted in their works. And Yahuwah Elohim heard them and purged us from our sins. He's talking about them to remember intercessors, those who stood in the gap when the breach of his people are evident, like Moshe. That's who he's looking for individuals now, not to condemn his wayward children for their pagan idolatry, but to expose it, to share the light, and to pray for them that they might see and be accepted and turn from it. The same heart that Moshe had, that is the heart of our Mashiach. And he came as a representation of the invisible Father, whose desire is that no man should perish, but all come to the knowledge of the truth. All right, so he said, but now the righteous have been assembled, and the foretellers are sleeping. Also we have left our land, and Zion has been taken away from us, and we have nothing now apart from Yahuwah Elohim and his Torah. Therefore, if we direct and dispose our hearts, we shall receive everything which we lost again by many times. For that which we lost was subjected to corruption, and that which we receive will not be corruptible. We also have written to our brothers in Babylon, so that I may attest to them these things also. And these things which I have said earlier should be before your eyes always, since we are still in the ruach of the power of our liberty. Meaning, we have the ability to make our own choice of keeping his Torah in the forefront of our mind, or thinking of other thoughts and doing our own will, what's right in our own eyes, as he put it. And further, Yahuwah the Most High is also long-suffering to us here, and has shown to us that which comes, and has not concealed from us what will happen at the end. Therefore, before his arbitration exacts his own and truth of that which is its due, let us prepare ourselves that we may possess and not be possessed, and that we may expect and not be put to shame, and that we may rest with our fathers and not be punished with those who hate us. For the youth of this world has passed away, and the power of creation is already exhausted, and the coming of the times is very near, and has passed by. And the pitcher is near the well, and the ship to the harbor, and the journey to the city, and existence to its end. Right there, he's giving different parables and allusions to things, quite like chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, saying before these conditions are met, saying before the end comes, get our hearts right, so that when it comes, we're not suffering our choices, but we are rewarded for them, because we're not ignorant of his will. All right, verse 11. It said, further, prepare yourselves so that when you sail and ascend from the ship, you may have rest and not be condemned when you have gone away. In the recognitions of Clement and in the apostolic constitutions, it's given as in a parable form that this existence is like sailing on a vessel, and we're trying to sail to that. Our destination is the Shamayim Yerushalayim, and the sea is this course of our existence. The waves and the tribulations are the different calamities and things that happen on your voyage and journey, whether it's the weather or pirates or whatever it might be. And they give this illusion with that as a picture for trying to make the voyage and staying in the ship to get there successfully. So we see that this is also an allusion to that. For behold, Yahuwah the Most High will cause all these things to come. There will not be an opportunity to repent anymore, nor a limit to the times, nor a duration of the periods, nor a change to rest, nor an opportunity to prayer, nor sending up petition, nor giving knowledge, nor giving love, nor opportunity of repentance, nor supplicating for offenses, nor prayers of the fathers, nor intercessions of the foretellers, nor help of the righteous. There is the proclamation of arbitration to corruption regarding the way to the fire and the path that leads to the glowing coals. Therefore, there is one Torah by one world, and an end for all who exist. Then he will make alive or existing those whom he has found, and he will purge them from sins, and at the same time he will destroy those who are polluted with sins. All right, well, that's pretty straightforward. We're to remove the corruption from our existence in this time. Purgatory is a fiction. When we die, when our body in this existence dies, that's the end. And if we have not combated to righteousness now, there is no more room for repentance. But right here, let's continue. This is now chapter 86, verse 1, and it's still Baruk writing his epistle to the 9.5 tribes in dispersion. It says, when you therefore receive the letter, read it carefully in your assemblies and think about it. In particular, however, on the yamim of your fasts. So in particular, on the yom of Ha-Kippurim, the yom of atonement, we call it, and then whenever you're doing your fasts, these words, particularly in 2nd Baruk, are what we're supposed to be considering and meditating on. And it says, and remember me by means of this letter in the same way as I remember you by means of this, and always. And it happened when I had finished all the words of this letter and had written it carefully until the end, I folded it, sealed it cautiously, and bound it to the neck of the eagle, and I let it go and sent it away. The end of the letter of Baruk, the son of Nariah. Shalom. Baruk are they that do the word of Yahuwah. I'm not certain if that last part was in the text or not, but that was the end of the epistle that he had written to the tribes in dispersion, and also of this 2nd Baruk. Just one moment here. All right, so at the end of the book here, is there any comments or questions before we move on and I share the little bit that I had in mind?
We did 2nd Baruk first, right?
Yes, we did. 2nd Baruk actually happens first in chronological order. And you'll see that as we read, because if you remember, it started before the destruction of the Hikkel. It walked us through that, and then he's writing about after it happened to the tribes right now. In the same way, in 1st Baruk, when we read about it, it's after the destruction and captivity while they're already in Babylon. So chronologically, it takes place afterwards.
That's what I thought. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yes.
I did as well.
Let's
What-
get on.
So there is a very wonderful little book, And I don't know if I have, I'm going to see if I can't start the video on my tablet. Nope, it won't let me. All right, so I won't share this with you, but I'll give you a link later. It's called The Post-Captivity Names of Israel, and it's by Reverend William Pascoe Gord. That's the title on there. So
I saw that in that group of books you had.
mhm.
You put the image up of.
Yes, ma'am. It's one of the books I've had the great pleasure of getting a hold of recently. There's a publishing company called Artisan Publishers. They have a website, www.artisanpublishers.com. That's artisanpublishers.com, one word. And I don't recommend purchasing anything today, of course, it's the Shabbat. But they have a variety of books that are from, they're older books, some of them from the 1800s, some of them contemporary to the modern times, including the ones written by Raymond Capt. But they cover a lot of this missing history. And if the reason why we're not taught it today, and it's hidden, is a different subject, but the fact that this stuff is here and it was known and it was even talked about within 20 years ago, I find amazing. But there's a list of books in here. I don't nearly have all of them, but some of them I do have. Is this one, The Missing Links in the Assyrian Tablets, is another amazing book that's very beneficial. It complements the one I'm going to share with you.
What's the name of the one you're sharing?
This one is called The Post-Captivity Names of Israel, or Yisrael. And it just, very simply, the gentleman covers the names they went by in Scripture, the historical fact that they were called those names by the places where they went into captivity, what other names they were called, where you can find that, and then what the history says about these people. He doesn't.
Okay, one more time. Post-captivity names of
Israel.
Israel. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, oh, that's, I think you have to turn off your sound. I'm sorry.
Huh?
I'm getting an echo. I think someone's.
I'm not muted.
Right, I think you have to mute. There we go. Sorry about that. This book, The Post-Captivity Names of Israel, or Yisrael, it just covers, it shows the historical facts of the different names that the children went by in secular records, so that you can go through the secular records and see the different accounts of the children and follow them through history. It quotes a little bit of them himself, but it's mostly just giving you the names and the information and where you can find out more about them. And it's really amazing. It covers even the pre-Exodus migration, where some of the 12 tribes had migrated with the sons of Zerah and founded different city-states in Greece, Athens, Thebes, eventually Sparta, the kingdom of Attica, the city of Troy, and then some of them later went and founded the Ulster kingdom in in Ireland. And those were primarily the tribe of Dan in Greece and in Ireland, not exclusively, but predominantly. And if you remember what it says about Dan, particularly in the testaments of the 12 patriarchs, and the fact that he was not numbered among the 12,000 that was sealed, if you keep in mind where they were in the history of those peoples, they're predominantly did not guard the covenant, just like Dan foretold in the Testament. So the important thing about learning this stuff is that we can literally see what the patriarchs walk out, the things that they spoke were they were foreshadowing what would happen in history. But in this book, when he's going through that, he gives an account of the different names for all the names that the children were known by. And then he also talks about some of the stuff that had happened to them. He gives an account of what they were like, which is pretty amazing. That's what I wanted to share with you if I can find it. That's where they went, the land of Arisath. He doesn't have any titles or anything. It just says chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. So you have to skim through it to find, there we go, the character of the Scythians. So I would like to read this section just so you can see that it is true. They in the land, they were committing idolatry. They were eating whatever they wanted. They were mistreating one another, and they had problems, and they were vomited out of the land because of it. But they wanted to go somewhere where they weren't accosted by anyone and keep the Torah. So this is the witness in history that applies to them. This is the character of the Scythians or Scythians, taken from Roland's Ancient History, Book 6, Chapter 1, Section 3. A digression concerning Scythians or Scythians. Formerly, they were Scythians both in Europe and Asia, most of them inhabiting those parts that lie towards the north. I design now chiefly to treat of the first, namely the European Scythians or Scythians. And then he skips several chapters, but he says he skips several chapters talking about manners and customs that aren't necessary to the study. But he goes on to quote, "It is now time to pass to the consideration of their manners and customs, milder and more compassionate, though possibly in another sense they may appear to be equally savage. The account I am going to give of them is chiefly taken from Justin. According to this author, the Scythians lived in great innocence and simplicity. They were ignorant indeed of all arts and sciences, but then they were equally unacquainted with vice. They did not make any divisions of their lands amongst themselves, says Justin. It would have been in vain for them to have done it, since they did not apply themselves to cultivate them. Horace, in one of his odes, tells us that some of them did cultivate a certain portion of the land allotted to them for 1 year only, at the expiration of which they were relieved by others, who succeeded them on the same conditions. So they rotated out who would do the crops, but they didn't continue in it. And this is only for the nomadic Scythians that went in the land of Ukraine. Different fractions of the tribes had different ways of living. Some of them had their own reigns. Ephraim had the Parthian Empire eventually. The Massagati had their own reign. They fought against Cyrus later on, but they were dwelling in a permanent area separate from these ones, which were like the roving nomads. Okay, this is the witness of them specifically, and the ones that wanted to be obedient. The Massagate actually worshipped; they were pagans, but that's a separate issue. And it says, they had no houses, nor settled habitation, but wandered continually with their cattle and their flocks from one country to country. Their wives and children they carried along with them in wagons, covered with the skins of beasts, which were all the houses they had to dwell in. Justice or righteousness was observed and maintained amongst them through the natural temper and disposition of the people, and not by any compulsion of laws, with which they were wholly unacquainted, meaning the laws of a city over them, like the laws of the Greek cities, where you're enforced and compelled by the authorities to follow them. They followed Yahuwah's Torah, and they were they were morally upright and at liberty, is basically what we can see here. But it says, righteousness was observed and maintained amongst them through the natural temper and disposition of the people, and not by any compulsion of laws with which they were completely unacquainted. No crime was more severely punished among them than theft, and that with good reason. For their herds and flocks, in which all their riches consisted, being never shut up, how could they possibly subsist if theft had not been most rigorously punished? They coveted neither silver nor gold, like the rest of mankind, and made milk and honey their principal diet, which, if you remember in the foretellers, it mentions that he would take them off and he would have them subsist on curds and honey. That was a fulfillment of that, literally, but also in the Ruach sense, the milk and honey would be the unadulterated milk of the word, and then the honey is like chokmah, or the wisdom of our Creator. I apologize with the dogs barking. All right, so continuing here, sorry about the dogs barking. This is a historical quote on the character of the Scythians, and this is the northern kingdom, or the northern tribes, the 9.5 that separated themselves and tried to keep the Torah outside of the land that they did not keep in the land. So the whole point of reading this isn't that everything here is accurate or 100% true, but this is a witness of what others said about these people and their character, which I think is a benefit to us. They say that they had no law, but that's ignorant. They had the Torah of our Creator. They just didn't know that. So moving on. It says, for their herds and flocks, in which all their riches consisted, being never shut up, how could they possibly subsist if theft had not been most rigorously punished? They coveted neither silver nor gold, like the rest of mankind. They made milk and honey their principal diet, and a literal fulfillment of the foretelling about that, surviving on curds and honey, and also it's a foreshadow of the unadulterated milk of the word and the honey, which is like the chokmah, or the wisdom of Elohim. All right. They were strangers to the use of linen or woolen manufacturers, and to defend themselves from the violent and continual cold of their climate, they made use of nothing but the skins of beasts. I found that rather interesting. After the sin of Adam, they likewise were covered by the skin of beasts. But moving on, it says, I said before that these manners of the Scythians might appear to some people very wild and savage. And indeed, what can be said for a nation that has lands and yet does not cultivate them, that has herds of cattle, of which they content themselves with eating the milk and neglect the flesh? The wool of their sheep might supply them with warm and comfortable clothes, and yet they use no other raiment than the skins of animals. But that which is the greatest demonstration of their ignorance and savageness, according to the general opinion of mankind, is their utter neglect of gold and silver, which have always been held in such great request in all civilized nations. But oh, how happy was this ignorance! How vastly preferable this savage state to our pretended politeness! This contempt of all conveniences of life or existence, says Justin, was attended with such an honesty and uprightness of manners as hindered them from ever coveting their neighbor's goods. For the desire of riches can only take place where riches can be made use of. And would to Elohim, says the same author, we could see the same moderation prevail amongst the rest of mankind, and the like indifference to the goods of other peoples. The world would not then have seen wars perpetually exceeding one another in all ages and in all countries, nor would the number of those that are cut off by the sword exceed that of those who fall by the irreversible decree and law of nature. Or what he means by that is by the decree of the Almighty when he says it's time, or what we call natural causes. Justin finishes his character of the Scythians with a very judicious reflection. It is a surprising thing, says he, that a happy natural disposition without the assistance of education should have inspired the Scythians with such a chokmah and moderation as the Greeks or Grecians could not obtain to, neither by the institutions of their legislators, nor the rules and precepts of all their philosophers, and that the manners of the barbarous nation should be preferable to those of a people so much improved and refined by the polite arts and sciences. So much more happy effects were produced by the ignorance of vice in the one than by the knowledge of virtue in the other. The Scythian fathers thought with good reason that they left their children a valuable inheritance when they left them in shalom and union with one another. One of their sovereigns, whose name was Scholorus, finding himself draw near his end, sent for all his children. I just want to point out something here. If you remember the Americans, the colonists, the pilgrims with wagons, that's an illusion of the same kind of thing. The Scythians living in wagons here, the pilgrims then, it's the same peoples. This was Menashe, just like Menashe is represented as America in foretelling. But that's a separate issue that we'll go into more detail at another time. The point I was liking to make here is the emblems on their coats of arms, the foretellings for the Baraka of Yaakov back in Genesis 49, just like how the three lions represented Peretz, and it's one of the symbols for the coat of arms for the sons of Yahuda is the three lions, or the red lion, or the red hand, or the Mogen Dawid, the star of Dawid, they call it, with the two Dalits. The different emblems represent different things that are in Scripture. So for Menashe, in the foretellings for Yahusuf, there was the horn, like the horns of the ox or the hunting horn, which was given to Menashe, or to Ephraim, and it's also represented as a unicorn or the one-horned animal in some of the coats of arms as well. It's a hunter's horn, it's the ox horn. Then you have a bundle of arrows, which we're about to read about. That's one of the emblems for Menashe, and that's been carried down through history as well. And we're going to see an example of it right here. But he says, one of the sovereigns whose name was Skurlorus, finding himself draw near his end, sent for all his children, and giving to each of them one after another a bundle of arrows tied fast together, desired them to break them. Each used his endeavors, but was not able to do it. Then untying the bundle and giving them the arrows one by one, they were very easily broken. Let this image, says the Father, be a lesson to you of the mighty advantage that results from union and concord. In order to strengthen and enlarge these domestic advantages, the Scythians used to admit their friends into the same terms of union with them as their relations. Friendship was considered by them as a set apart and inviolable alliance, which differed but little from that which nature has put between brethren, and which they could not infringe without being guilty of a heinous crime. And if you're familiar with how we're supposed to treat our brethren in the belief, it's the exact same. Our word is our bond. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. These are all things that are enjoined in the renewed covenant that the children literally kept as part of the Torah outside of the land, because they knew these things were right and enjoined for them to do. But just to continue here, this is the author of the book, not quoting anymore, but now writing in his own opinion. He says, ancient authors seem to have vied with each other who should most extol the innocence and manners that reigned among the Scythians by magnificent encomiums. That of Horace I shall transcribe at large. That poet does not confine it entirely to the Scythians, but joins the Geti with them, like the Massagati or the Greater Gati and the Lesser Gati, which later became known as the Goths, the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, respectively. It says, the poet did not confine himself to the Scythians, so Menashe, the ones that were roving in their wagons only, but also to the Geti with them, who were near neighbors. It is in that beautiful ode where he envies against the luxury and irregularities of the age in which he lived, after having told us that shalom and tranquility of mind is not to be procured by, or either by means of immense riches or sumptuous buildings. He adds, 100 times happier are the Scythians who roam about in their internet houses, their wagons, and happier even are the hardy Geti. With them the earth, or Eretz, without being divided by landmarks, produces her fruits, which are gathered in common. There each man's tillage is but of 1 year's continuance, and when that term of his labor is expired, he is relieved by a successor, who takes his place and manures the ground on the same conditions. There the innocent stepmothers form no cruel designs against the existence of their husbands' children by another or by a former wife. The wives do not pretend to domineer over their husbands on account of their fortunes, nor are to be corrupted by the insinuating language of spruce adulterers. The greatest portion of a maiden is her father's and mother's virtue, her inviolable attachment to her husband, and her perfect disregard of all other men. They dare not be untrustworthy, because they are convinced that infidelity is a crime and its reward is death. When we consider the manners and character of the Scythians without prejudice, we can possibly forbear to look upon them with esteem and admiration. Or it says, can we possibly forbear to look upon them without esteem and admiration? Does not their manner of living or existing, as to the exterior part of it at least, bear a great resemblance to that of the patriarchs, who had no fixed habitation, who did not till the ground, who had no other occupation than that of feeding their flocks and herds, and who dwelt in tents? Can we believe this people, who much to be pitied for not comprehending, or rather for despising, the use of gold and silver? Is it not to be desired that those materials or those metals had ever lain buried in the bowels of the earth, and that they had never been dug up from thence to become the causes and instruments of almost every crime? What advantage could gold and silver be to the Scythians, who valued nothing but what the necessities of men actually required, and took care to set narrow bounds to those necessities? It is no wonder that, living as they did without houses, they should make no account of those arts that were so highly valued in other places, as architecture, sculpture, and painting, or that they should despise fine clothes and costly furniture, since they found the skins of beasts sufficient to defend them against the inclemency of the seasons. After all, can we truly say that these pretended advantages contribute to real happiness in existence? Were those nations that had them in the greatest plenty more healthful and robust than the Scythians? Did they exist to a greater age than they? Or did they spend their existence in greater freedom and tranquility, or a greater exemption from cares and troubles. Let us acknowledge to our shame, sorry, let us acknowledge to the shame of ancient philosophy the Scythians, who did not particularly apply themselves to the study of man's wisdom, but carried it, however, to a greater height. It says wisdom here. It says they didn't study wisdom or chokmah, but they carried it to a greater height in their practice than either the Egyptians, Grecians, or any other civilized nation. They did not give the name of goods or riches to anything but what, speaking as man, truly deserved that title, as health, strength, courage, the love of labor and liberty, innocence of existence, sincerity, an abhorrence of all fraud and dissimulation, and, in a word, all such qualities as render a man more virtuous and more valuable. If to these happy dispositions we add the knowledge and the love of the true Elohim of and of our Redeemer, without which the most exalted virtues are of no value, they would have been a perfect people. And while this men didn't know that, I will contest that they did have the truth. They had the covenant, they were keeping it, and they knew they knew their creator when they were obedient to him. So they at this time they were a perfect people, and like their forefathers, sojourning in a land not their own. It says, I'm almost finished with this. But it says, when we compare the manners of the Scythians with those of the present age, we are tempted to believe that the pencils which drew so beautiful a picture were not free from partiality and flattery, and that both Justin and Horace have decked them with virtues that did not belong to them. But all antiquity agrees in giving the same testimony of them, and Homer in particular, whose opinion ought to be of great weight, calls them the most righteous and upright. Says when he's making comparisons, he compares the Scythians to barbarians or uncivilized individuals because they were the standard for civilization in the world at that time. Everyone looked to them as how to behave towards another because they were obedient. It didn't always stay that way. Eventually, they let luxury get the better of them and covetousness crept in and they started mistreating one another, and there you have it. But it was during that time that our Mashiach came and sent the emissaries and gave the Besorah. And then it wasn't for another 2 centuries that the culmination of their error filled up and they were sent into the belly of the beast into Europe, not only as a arbitration and a chastisement against the assembly there who had become pagan, but also to punish his children who had been wayward, just like Jonah, who was not willing to preach, to the nations at Nineveh or Ninus. He was swallowed up by the beast of the well, and then for 3 yamim in the belly of the sea monster before being spit out. It's that same picture with his children, what happened to them in Europe, the fall of the pagan Rome, the rise of the 10 nations which gave their power unto the little horn. It all ties together. And one interesting thing that we're not going to get to anytime soon, but in Revelation, when it talks about the 10 nations that come from the fall of the pagan Rome, they have diadems they call crowns on their heads. And that's the first time in Europe or in Roman Empire that the word for a crown is used for the royalty there. And it's an Asiatic crown. It's an Asiatic or a Middle Eastern form of rulership. In Rome, they would use laurel wreaths before that time. But after that time, all the nobility of Europe was of the tribe of Yehuda. They used crowns. So I thought that was an interesting connection. I learned that from the Hore Apocalypticae and E.B. Elliott's commentary on the Greek of that section. And while he himself was not aware of the nobility being the literal seed of Yehuda and the literal children of Dawid, So that had no significance to him. He did point out that it was odd and that it was Asiatic crowns being set on on those horns. So it's pretty neat.
It's interesting that the Kohanim wore the crown with his name
Hmm. Absolutely.
when
And
when they were one in the land.
that's right. And before they had a sovereign over them, Aaron was like a sovereign. It says very clearly, he determined when someone was to exist or to die, whether they were clean or unclean, if they're of the people or out. He made these determinations, and he was the arbitrator for our Creator. So he also had the first fruits and tributes of everything, like a sovereign would get. So it's that picture. But when they asked for a actual sovereign over them, they had that separated. And so now it was not just the tithes that were due to our Creator, which went to the tribe of Lewi and to the High Kahuna, but now the actual sovereign would get their dues as well. That is an interesting picture, though. Thanks for pointing that out.
Mhm.
That was pretty much what I want to cover in that section. That was a witness in secular, or what they call profane, histories about the believers that were keeping the Torah outside of the country, that they did not keep in it. It was not all of the 12 tribes in dispersion. There was still some that for about 390 years were in captivity during the reign of the Assyria, Babylon, the Medes and Persians, and they actually I'm sorry, during the Assyrian reign, yeah, and then the Medes and Persians, and when the Greek Empire came and split into four, it was during the reign of the Seleucid Empire and the time of the Maccabees that the Parthian Empire came about, and that was after the chastisement of Ephraim had been filled, and he had taken his punishment, and then they were able to come to the truth for a while. They had some of the same nobility from the royal Scythians as part of the Asarksid dynasty that reigned over them, like I'd mentioned earlier. But that was a nation over nations, or an empire, a company of nations, which is reminiscent of Ephraim. And just like you see Ephraim and then Manasseh here, later on it's also in that same capacity. When the Reformation happens, it's Great Britain is Ephraim and becomes the fullness of the nations, it was foretold. And Manasseh is the great nation, which would be America. But every place in the world where the children of Yisrael are not predominant and a tribe is not represented as a majority, the British Empire took over and became the fullness of that, so that area would be part of Ephraim in foretelling purposes. They might not be literal descendants, but just like it said in the Torah, when they were in the land, the one sojourning wherever they sojourn, they were part of that tribe. That's to tell us that in the world at large, to comprehend what foretelling is speaking to us now, whatever people is with the majority of that tribe is represented. Like Manasseh is America, the British Commonwealth would be Ephraim, France is Reuben, Ireland and Greece, at least Athens and Thebes and like that, was predominantly Dan. And not all of it's Dan, but most of it is, and that's most of Ireland was Roman Catholic for most of it, and separated from the true covenant. But that it helps us to comprehend the foretellings and the things that are when we see the picture that's being set there. I don't actually have a full picture of every place that the 12 tribes went to represent, but I do know some of them. We just mentioned Ephraim, which was the fullness of the nations. Lewi is spread throughout, but pretty much everywhere you have overseers and elders and ministers today, that's what represents Lewi. It's not always the literal seed, but it's those that were going to be like that. It's the ones that were worthy and the intelligent that wanted to serve our Maker, that were brought closer to Him. The ones that were spread throughout the world that had no nation of their own were Lewi and Shimon. those joined unto him, that would be his ministers, and then those who hear, that hearken to him. And that's a picture of, in the world, you have the 12 tribes, the whole body, but not all of them were obedient. It was those that were joined unto him and that heard and did. So there's a picture with that. But Gad went to Spain, and also some of Shimon was there. I don't know if there's anywhere else, but also the Spaniards went to South America, Mexico, and intermixed with them. You have Benjamin in Iceland. You have the Naphtali, which were known as the White Huns in dispersion for the most part. They went over to Norway and Sweden. Reuben would be France. I'm not certain about Germany particularly. I don't know if that's Yahuda as a body or not, but it could be. I'm not certain. It's not the royal line. The royal line of Yahuda from Peretz, Zerah, and Dawid are the literal nobility of Europe today, and all the children that came from him. There's many royalty descendants that existed, never sat on a throne and never will in the scheme of things now, in this existence. They might have a throne when he returns and rewards us, but they're still from the seed of Dawid, literal blood descendants, which the promises in Scripture. The seed of the righteous will inherit the Eretz, and he wipes out the wicked. We have an example in Scripture, in a few of them. Jeroboam is one, the house of Omri, Ahab, and Jezebel. We also have Herod. If you read if you read Josephus's account of what happens to Herod the Great and his family, because of his wicked disposition and his disobedience to the Torah, his entire family was wiped out. And this is true for all of those in nobility, for all of those in higher positions of authority, and in the larger scheme of things. If you're not obedient, your seed becomes less. If you are obedient, your seed inherits the earth. And most of the people alive today, I'd say everyone that exists, is from someone who was a believer, period. Whether they're Abraham the believer, or Noach the believer, or Hanok, we all come from a believer, and that theme keeps getting whittled away. The wicked die off, the believers are multiplied. And the reason for that is because it's literally written in our DNA. If you have those that sin are punished to the third and fourth of those who hate our Creator, and that's known in science as epigenetics, where literally if you have a propensity for some type of sin like watching pornography or alcoholism or whatever, or even if you have pleasant dispositions like giving to the poor, mourning for those who are in error, you literally will have your DNA changed by these behaviors. And it's something that they call epigenetics. It's in the blood, but it will speak to your mitochondrial DNA, and it will change your programming so that it's written differently. And you pass these things on to your children so that they will have a propensity for either this vice or virtue that you do. And that propensity for repentance is what he cultivated in all of these individuals. Their seed is in existence today because they have it's in their genes to want to do that. It's built in. Everyone who didn't repent before the flood was wiped out. That was that age. It was set, period. Everyone who didn't repent at the time of our Mashiach's culmination up until the fullness of this third age will be wiped out. It's the same picture because he doesn't change his standard. And everyone that is sinning when he comes again will be wiped out, so that only those that are not sinning and every nation that did not abuse his children will remain when he comes for the millennial reign.
That's why they want to change our DNA.
Quite
Yeah.
possibly. You know, with the whole thing with vaccinations and stuff like that, with what they can do, I don't say we shouldn't look into what's true about it, but I'm very cautious about saying anything about that being the mark of the beast or things of that nature. Can it be an injection that can cause us to no longer um, have the same areas function in our body that stimulate worship? Certainly, but that's not because it's something in that will change it. Everything that happens is because of what he said. The reason why what we call the laws of nature exist is because he said it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why everything is because he established that as a foundational, and it's true. When he wants something to be different, it is because he wills it. So we have to get our mind around that. And what scripture says is that our nephesh, what they translate typically as the soul or the inner being of a man, the nephesh is in the blood. The blood goes everywhere. Oxygen, what we call oxygen, goes everywhere. The nephesh is in the blood, and it's all throughout the body. So when we put something into the bloodstream, we're putting something into where the nephesh is. That's an abomination.
Yep.
That right there is what prohibits me from ever considering that even a possibility again. Has nothing to do with the other stuff that's in it. It's where our inner being dwells. We're not supposed to abominate that with anything.
Exactly.
Now,
I've often wondered which tribe I'm from, or if there would even be any way to be from one tribe.
I can't say with definite surety that I know for myself either. I do know my grandmother's father was Leon Johnson. His grandfather, I think, was a Bly, which is from the Blythe family from the Caledonian history. That's from the tribe of Louis and Yahuda. They married into it. So I know for a fact I have at least Yahuda and Louis in my line, but all the Germans are from the 12 tribes. All the Germanic speaking peoples were from the 12 tribes. All the Celtic speaking peoples, not people that speak the languages themselves, but the actual blood people, those were the literal descendants of the 12 tribes. But what tribe you belong to specifically, I don't have all the answers. If you have French in you, most likely Reuben. If you have some Irish, most likely Dan. Same thing if you're Greek, most likely Dan. If you have Scythian ancestry, most likely Menashe. If your ancestry came from Parthia, most likely Ephraim. But all 12 tribes are represented. Norway and Sweden predominantly would be considered Naphtali.
Supposedly, I'm Dutch, Irish, and English.
Well, the English is Ephraim predominantly. All 12 tribes are represented there. Even if you just look at what they call Scotland, with the people known as the Caledonians, before anyone else was there, all 12 tribes were represented with them in a little remnant. So they've always been there, but they just predominantly, whoever was the biggest people is what they'd go by. In the case of the Caledonians, it was Yahuda and Louis. All of the family of Daniel, the ruling prince, and all the family of Louis or Lawrence from the tribe of Louis went with the remnant that was delivered and eventually landed in Caledonia. And with their whole families, survivors or remnant from the people that were with them every time also went. But it wasn't always, I don't know if it was always a collective tribe that was with them or not. It never specifies. It does say that when the sacking of Troy happened, the remnant that was true to our Maker, there was only 100 individuals. The rest of them that survived were paganized, and they went to the sword, and they were scattered, brought into slavery. There was other things that happened. 2 survivors from the royal line of Zerah that were in Troy. They weren't the ruling prince that were righteous, but they were there. One of them became the founder of the city of Rome after marrying the daughter of one of the sovereigns of the Lateran Council, and he founded the city of Rome. And then another cousin or descendant relative of him took survivors that were slaves from Troy, liberated them from other Greek peoples and took them and founded the ancient Britons. And these are known historical things. When Rome invaded England, or Britain originally, the Caesar was invading them, the sovereign there wrote a letter to him appealing to this, saying that they were brothers. Why are you attacking? But I later came to know, and that's something we can talk about later, the Druidic religion that was prominent in the British Isles quite possibly was something that was started by Seth that was perverted later on, but some of their tenets in that they had these tenets or these triads of doctrine that they held to. Their primary one was to worship Elohim, love your neighbor, and die for your country. Like, support and die for your country, don't be a traitor. And that was absolutely contrary to the Rome's expansionist imperialism at the time. So one of the objectives of Rome invading the British Isles at the time was to destroy their colleges or their seminaries for Druidic learning. And they did that about 7 years after they got a foothold in the country. Another witness for that is in the ancient history of Caledonia, when they finally got a foothold in the Caledonian area in the northern part of England, or the United Kingdom of today, what they call Scotland. They destroyed all the synagogues except for the one they couldn't find. But it was the same premise. They wanted to get rid of the schools of learning that were teaching this thing that was contrary to what they were trying to do. I thought that was rather interesting. But all these peoples are related. The Roman peoples are an amalgamation of Japheth and Shem, of Ham, or not Ham, sorry, Japheth and Abraham's seed, the 12 tribes. The Greek peoples are a mixture of Japheth, the Yahweh, right, and the Hebrews that were founding city-states there. They amalgamated. There's other peoples that are from Japheth that are still indigenous or separate from themselves, and that have also amalgamated somewhat with the 12 tribes, which this was foreknown as the foretelling to Japheth, how he would expand his dwelling, he would be open and wide, and he would dwell in the tents of Shem, right? And it was kind of a mirror thing here. It's the same thing that happened. But you have the Basque people, the Laplanders, the Finns, which have mixed with the Swedes. Madai, which is in the Middle East, still is the Medes. The Estonians, and then you have Rome and Greece. Those are the 7 sons of Japheth that still have 7 peoples that exist today. The sons of Ham, you can do the same thing with the sub-Saharan Africans and the peoples there, but they also have 12 tribes mixed in with them. And this is proven in historical fact, in the records, and in scripture. They built a Hekkel in Egypt. They had sons of Louis that went over there and they were generals for Cleopatra's army and served in her reign. These people later became known as the Bantu in Africa, and they know that they have people that are from the line of the Kohen. So it fits perfectly with what's in scripture, Josephus and these other accounts. And that's just to point out, it's nothing about your skin color. It has everything to do with your heart. But knowing these things help us to know what scripture is really teaching us, and that's why it's very important. So it's not saying, oh, only Germans are saved or only Celtic people are of the 12 tribes. That's not even true. You have Mexicans, you have African Americans, whether you want to be black, Jamaican, Haitian, whatever. You have every color skin, every people all over the world. Some of them are literal descendants from the 12 tribes. That's a fact. Aside from that, anyone who sojourns amongst them, who is circumcised in heart, is grafted in and considered part of Yisrael. And it's never, even when it was Abraham, it's never been about just the blood. It's always been those who sojourn with them of the same disposition. But thank you for that. Is there any other comments or questions that we have?
So even a mutt can be grafted in.
Absolutely.
Because that's what I am, Heights 57. Uh-oh.
I am as well, but I found out my family mostly came from Germany. Like I said, aside from knowing that the Blythes in my family and my coat of arms, I'm from America. We moved from Germany. That could both be Menashe and Yahuda. My family lived in the area of Hanover, Lower Saxony, they call it now, and it's part of the place. It's one of the areas where the High German sound shift happened. Now that doesn't mean anything to anybody here, but
Where my grandpa was, he was a teacher there in
okay.
Hanover.
Well, that's interesting. You should know then that when the Yahudim from Palestine, who had been influenced by the Babylonian captivity, when they migrated into Europe, everywhere they went with Germanic speaking peoples, they caused another sound shift to happen. The first sound shift in the Germanic languages happened when they were expelled from the land and they were living amongst the Assyrians. They lost the use of their prefixes and suffixes, the loss of the use of their letters, and then some of the way the words functioned. And when that happened, they locked in the way things sounded, and they had what they call the Great Sound Shift, where all the Germanic sound languages went through this sound shift at one point. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Hebrew or the Yahudith at all, but they have these letters called the Begad Kephath letters. Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Che, or Kaf Petau, Begad Kephath. And those letters in the Hebrew language shift based on whether you have suffixes and prefixes or what verb tense you're using and what gender you're using. So if you're speaking of a masculine singular, it's different than a feminine plural. And all of those relate to how the vowels change in the language. So the sound shifts were always with the Begad Kephath letters. The same letters that shift in the Hebrew would change in the Germanic and lock in place. So the first time it happened was when they were expelled and they had the migration of the children around 500 BC. It was the first shift. And then the second shift was only for a section of Germanic speaking peoples. And it was wherever the Yahudim from Palestine shifted or went, and they caused what was known as the High German sound shift. And now High German is different from what they call Low German or Old Saxon. And the Begad Kephath letters, again, are different. So where you would say day, for example, to use that word in the English, it would be Tag in High German because that Dalet shifted to a tau. And the T's would be a double S because they, instead of saying even today, the Yahudim will say beret brass or beret bass instead of beret Brit for their covenant children, or when a child becomes for their bar mitzvah, they'll say the double S instead of the TH sound. And that carried over into the German where they say this S instead of the T sound in their words. So it's an amazing thing. But everywhere where the High German sound shift happened, the Yahudim from Palestine went there. So it's quite possible that those areas were already predominantly Yahuda that they went to. And you can see that in the sound shift. But I don't know that as fact. It's just on my idea in my head. But it is rather interesting.
What came,
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
What came to me was like my great grandfather or whoever it was back there. My aunt told me before she passed away that it was von Helmir, the ones that were in Hanover.
Von Helm, that means nobility.
And they changed it to Helmer when they came to North America.
Mm-hmm.
But she says it was von Helmir.
That ties into the nobility from Germany, and that's definitely from Yahuda, because all the nobility from all of Europe is from the line of Yahuda.
Well,
But
that was on my mother's side.
that's interesting. Yeah, that's, in the larger scheme of things, that doesn't really matter if you're delivered for your what we call salvation issue. What tribe you belong to, it doesn't matter.
My
Who?
grandpa wasn't. My grandmother was. She was a Haas from Bosnia.
All right.
She was a Haas. Chadwick, I think, was one of her names, like her family names.
That's really neat. I haven't been able to trace my name. The Kronjägers, it comes straight out of Germany, Hanover, right there with um, the Windsor family, the current nobility in England. They
Yeah.
came out of the the sovereign, the reign of Hanover as well. When the English needed a new monarch, they were looking for whoever was the strongest tie to the seat of Dawid for rulership over the throne, and it was from Hanover that they brought them.
Hmm.
So that's another reason why I say that. But like I said, I don't know that for sure. And even if that's not the case, that doesn't really matter. But the importance for this is when it speaks of Yahuda in foretelling, the tribe of Yahuda, the royalty, and the nation that it culminates in, whatever that might be, is what's represented. And that's why it's important for us. So when it speaks of Reuben at the end times, it's France. When it's speaking of Yahusuf, that's America and Britain. I mean, it's not to say, it's not just the British people. It's the British Commonwealth, and everywhere they had a dominion, those are the Ephraim. That's what the foretelling applies to. The fruitful ones that are the abundant inheritance of the end of the world and the nation that he's going to pick up. That was the idea of the coming, the fullness of the nations, the Besora being brought to the nations and them coming into covenant with him. So all of those coming in of the what we call Gentiles is considered Ephraim in that capacity, and that's what foretelling points to, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the benefit of learning these things. But
Yeah.
for the sake of saying
Didn't Paul say not to get into genealogies or genealogies?
which is unprofitable and useless, right? Because we have to be circumcised in the heart to be grafted in to Yisrael. There's no other way that makes it. If you're not born again, grafted in, that doesn't count, blood or not.
Well, you said earlier that one of the symbols for Yehuda was the Mogan David, the two Dalits. So were the two Dalits appropriated by the occult?
Yes, and that's what you remember. The adversary, he's a liar and a thief. He can steal, kill, and destroy. He does not create. So all the symbolism and all the occult things that he does, he only takes from what is and perverts it. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Now,
like the heart.
Mhm.
The heart is it's found in creation, but it's been perverted and polluted.
Yes, ma'am. Just like I'll give you another example. The Fer de Lis is a symbol all over all over signs of nobility and other things. They have decorations on books and motifs and all over the Fer de Lis, and that's a flower. It's actually the equinox flower. If you look at it, and that's something that's pretty amazing. It's a creation of our, it's very specific in what it does, and it's a beautiful thing. But this Fer de Lis is a extremely powerful occult symbol that's all about Satan, if you go by what they say and you believe it. But these things are meaningless nonsense. We're not to have images and idols and worship it. And if we do that, then it says nothing is all is clean to the clean, but those who are perverted, nothing is clean. So the
Mm.
idea, we don't worship images, and if you happen to see a fleur-de-lis image, there's nothing inherently, oh, evil. But what they do is they have these symbols and images, and this is what, because he said don't have images and people use them, then they are allowed to do that, and demons can lead men astray. So if they have this image and they use it for magic, it actually can have an effect. Another example, and this is something that was witnessed by John Todd, an ex-member of the Council of 13. He was in the Illuminati and came out of it when he became a believer. But he said that whenever they make a new music album or they have a CD, they'll have a master record that it's from, and on the full moon with their occult practices, because Satan has his witchcraft, and the witchcraft has to follow certain rules that he set up for it to be functional. None of that stuff is real or important. It's all lies to keep men deceived. But if they do the things that he says, he'll do what he said to give them a false power, like a mockery of the Ruach. And that's what witchcraft is. It's a mockery of the gifts of the Ruach.
So disgusting.
Yes, but they take these things and pervert it. However, it's nothing to us. And the Mogan David, the Mogan Dawid, the two Dalits together, that's quite possibly one of those symbols as well.
It's the Mogan David.
It's the star that
Wine.
that star that they use on the flag of Israel today.
Oh,
That
they call the Star of David?
Right, that's the Mogan or the shield of Dawid. It's two Dalits together.
Oh.
But when you have that symbol, they say in the occult practices, like the pentagram or the five-pointed star on the American flag, they use for satanic things and witchcraft. But the Star of David, that six-pointed one, they say they use that one when they're trying to bind a demon or a powerful entity and not have it have any effect. These are things that the adversary has used to mock and deceive others and keep them from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are true. They work. That's what they do. I'm not going to say that he's lying in that case, but that doesn't mean that it's not, that doesn't mean that's where it originated or even what it represents in reality. Just like the equinox flower is a flower our Creator made that represents the twice in a year it blooms to show the 182 days apart without fail his truth, right? It's commemorating the truth of reality. In the same thing, these are that same way. But with that Star of David, just so you know, the first king or the first sovereign in Ireland was actually the man who married Zedekiah's daughter Taffy. When Yirmiyahu brought her over, before then there was only princes and chiefs of Yahuda that ruled over the separate clans in the area. But when she came as queen, and when she married, that individual became king or sovereign of Ireland, and that started the dynasty with the seed of David over the house of Israel, as they call it. And then they spread through their intermarrying to other nobility as well. And that was one line from Dawid into Europe. The other one was from the Parthian nobility that came in. The sons of Odin were from the seed of Dawid. And both Odin's children and Taffy's children intermixed with the sons of Zerah that were already through Europe, ruling over them. But that culminated in all the royalty of now. I kind of forgot what I was talking about. I apologize.
We ask about the Dalits.
Oh, right. So anyways, on his coat of arms, and this was the first time it ever happened, but they had the red hand for Zerah and the Mogan, the Star of David, because Taffy had married, and his children were literally from the seed of Dawid, and they carried that emblem for their coat of arms. later on and now, the seat of David's coat of arms is the harp, and that's still on the Windsor's coat of arms today. It's also the harp and the star. Those are for the seat of David, and when you see those, that's what they're claiming. Before I forget, we had mentioned what we were going to read afterwards. Now that we've read 2nd Baruk, we're also going to read through 1st Baruk, and then we're going to cover Ezra, the writings from there, because in these ones we're seeing the captivity and dispersion, and the righteous being given consolation, and then their return, and they're being given consolation in the revelation of the foretellings to Ezra. And what they see, the reason why these are apocryphal as we go through them, is they're showing the same things that we see in Revelation about the woes that were coming, and what we see in history, the rise of Islam, the coming of these calamities for the rejection of the word after he came. And that's something that we'll see more and more, and I hope, Father willing, that it becomes clear. Our Mashiach said, before I came, they had no sin. Now that I have come, they have no excuse for their sin. And everything from the time he came afterwards was the truth being made evident to a people. How they responded, that's what they have coming.
Yeah, you're coming into accountability as soon as you know.
That's right. And so and that's why he said, this is why Kepha throughout the recognition said, when you hear these things, you turn, he'll attribute it as ignorance is the mother of all demons, and it'll be known that when you hear the precepts of existence and you turn from the evil of your former ways, it will be attributed as ignorance as the account of the sins that you'd committed, and you won't be punished for them. But if after coming to knowledge of truth, you continue in the evils that you were held by beforehand, then you only have yourself to blame for the punishment that you have coming.
Mm-hmm. Is this what we were supposed to remind you about?
Yes. All right, but was there any other comments or questions before we wrap things up?
I don't have any.
You know
Right.
that thing I mentioned at the early part, like about the pruning and if I can get that posted, will you make a comment on it, Richard?
Certainly. And I'll also try to
Okay.
find my comment, because I wrote on my whiteboard once, I was looking up the word for a song, Zamir, and I looked that up and broke it down. It's like taking an axe to bitterness and sadness. Taking a weapon to being bitter and sad by singing, and it also, remember, it helps to pierce, convict the ruach, and help correct the behaviors. That all plays into that word. For to sing a psalm is also to prune and trim.
That's lovely. I think that needs to be shared with everyone.
Well, I'll try to find that one again and share that, and I'll tag it in your comment if you make one, or I'll tag you in that post for you.
Okay, I've been trying to move it, but my daughter took my charger, so I'm not sure if my tablet's passing it
All right.
between the tablet and the computer.
Well, I
Tried a
really
number of
appreciate
times.
your time, and I always enjoy being able to share and study with you ladies. Was there any other
Oh,
comments or questions?
we appreciate you, Richard.
Oh, so much.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Shabbat Shalom, everyone who's enjoyed this reading with us, and Father willing, you're able to follow along. If you have any questions, please comment. And if you enjoy these or you find them to be edifying and beneficial, please share. It isn't for anyone here to be lifted up in themselves, but to share the truth for his sake, and so that his children and those who will love him can know the truth and come to it. So thank you for your time, and Shabbat Shalom.